The group's main focus was providing humanitarian assistance to civilians displaced by the brutal reign of ISIS: food, water, medicine, basic necessities. But what Ephraim quickly realized is that in the areas closest to ISIS-controlled territory, there was no clear line between relief work and combat. In these regions, the violence was constant. Civilians were dying by the thousands, often in mass executions, or caught in the crossfire of shifting front lines. So, not long after arriving, Ephraim did what Ephraim always did. He stepped up. Over the next several months, he was embedded with this volunteer unit as they moved through contested zones. And even though he wasn't technically there as a fighter, the truth is, Ephraim became their unofficial leader and protector. When ISIS militants approached villages, Ephraim picked up a rifle and fought. When civilians were trapped behind enemy lines, he volunteered to go in. And in one instance, when ISIS fighters had surrounded a building full of wounded civilians, Ephraim and a small group kicked down the door, returned fire, and physically carried dozens of people out, some on stretchers, some on their backs, through open gunfire. There's footage of him, caught on a local cameraman's video, sprinting through dust and smoke, dragging people to safety. That's how we first saw him on the news. Not as a soldier, not even as a journalist, but as one man, on his own, with a beard, an AK, and a purpose. What Ephraim did in Iraq made headlines around the world. But the thing is, he didn't want it to. He never intended to be some symbol or hero. In fact, shortly after that footage aired, Ephraim disappeared. He stopped contacting the media. He went off-grid again, eventually slipping into Syria, where he continued doing the same thing, helping civilians, fighting when he had to, and asking for nothing in return. To this day, we don't know exactly where Ephraim is. Some say he's back in the US, quietly living out his life. Others say he's still overseas, embedded in some forgotten conflict zone, helping people who have no one else. But all of us who served with him, who trained beside him, we remember that moment on the pool deck back in 2011, when he turned to me, through gritted teeth, and said, "Shut up. Everybody here is in pain." Let me know if you'd like this section adapted into a voiceover script format, stylized for a YouTube video, with breaks for cuts, transitions, or scene visuals. In the entrance to the tunnel system with tons of rubble and debris, effectively trapping anyone who might have still been down there. There was no way to confirm if ISIS fighters had actually escaped through that upper tunnel, but if they had, they were now sealed inside a tomb of their own making. After that incident, Ephraim's role as just a volunteer faded completely. He had proven himself in combat, not just once, but over and over, running into minefields, clearing buildings, chasing fighters into pitch-black tunnels with no backup. Word spread quickly, not just among the volunteers, but also among the Iraqi soldiers. They respected him. They started calling him the American, not out of novelty, but out of reverence. Over the following weeks, Ephraim was everywhere. On one mission, he and Sky responded to reports of ISIS militants holding civilians hostage in a small compound. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, the two of them stormed the building under heavy fire. Inside, they found women and children huddled together. Some of them had been rigged with explosives. Ephraim personally disarmed one of the suicide vests while Sky provided cover. That's the kind of chaos they dealt with, and it was relentless. And then, one day, it all came to a head. They were assigned to help clear yet another ISIS-held village just outside Mosul. Intelligence had reported the village was mostly abandoned, but when Ephraim and the team moved in, they were ambushed. Gunfire erupted from rooftops, RPGs hit the road just behind them, and the unit was pinned down. Ephraim was hit by shrapnel in the leg early in the fight, but he refused to leave. He stayed in the fight for hours, directing fire, pulling injured civilians out of buildings, coordinating with the Iraqi army to call in support. And finally, with dwindling ammo and growing casualties, they pushed the remaining ISIS fighters out. That fight would end up being Ephraim's final combat mission in Iraq. His injuries eventually forced him to be evacuated back to a nearby field hospital, and from there he was sent home. He didn't return with medals or parades. He came back quietly, just like he had left. The war for him had always been about something bigger than himself, something pure, defending the defenseless, standing in the gap where nobody else would. And even though he never asked for recognition, word of what he did spread. He was interviewed by a handful of journalists, but he always kept the focus on the people still trapped in war zones. "They're the brave ones," he would say. Not me, but to everyone who knew him, from his SEAL teammates to those volunteers in Iraq, to the Iraqi civilians he helped save. They knew the truth and loaded up into one of their armored vehicles, bringing with them basic medical supplies and their rifles, unsure of what they were about to walk into. As they pushed farther into the northern part of Mosul, still largely controlled by ISIS, the destruction was overwhelming. Every building was shattered. Burnt-out vehicles, twisted rebar, and the stench of death were everywhere. Eventually, after cautiously advancing block by block, they came upon a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. At the center of a large open area surrounded by ruined buildings, there were dozens and dozens of civilian bodies, men, women, and children, some piled together, others left as they fell. Many had been shot execution style. Some were charred. Some had been run over by vehicles. There were baby clothes, stuffed animals, backpacks. It was the massacre. Ephraim and the others were stunned. They didn't speak. They just stood there and took it in. As they moved closer, they began hearing faint groans. Some of the victims were still alive. Without thinking twice, Ephraim and the others rushed forward under the threat of sniper fire, knowing ISIS was likely still in the area watching the kill zone. They pulled the wounded into the armored vehicle, as many as they could fit, and raced them back to their makeshift aid station. Then they turned around and went back. Again and again, under gunfire and mortar blasts, they ferried survivors out. One of the children they pulled from the massacre site, a little girl no older than 5, had been shot in the stomach and left for dead. Ephraim cradled her in his arms as they drove back. She clutched his sleeve the entire ride, even though she couldn't speak. She survived. That day, Ephraim and the team rescued over 30 survivors from the massacre site. And by the time Iraqi forces fully secured Mosul a few weeks later, Ephraim's name had become synonymous with courage and sacrifice, not because he had to be there, but because he chose to be. For his teammates as they rushed into the open, 2 of the other volunteers sprinted to the pile of bodies, where the little girl and the 2 wounded men were still lying. One of the volunteers scooped up the girl. She was so light, he said, it was like carrying a bundle of clothes. The other began dragging one of the injured men, while Ephraim continued firing to suppress the ISIS positions. The third survivor, also a wounded man, tried to stand on his own but collapsed. Seeing this, Ephraim broke cover, sprinted through the smoke and gunfire, and grabbed the man by his collar, dragging him back behind the tank. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortar blasts shook the ground so violently that dust clouded their vision, but Ephraim kept pulling until all 3 survivors were behind the tank with them. By this point, ISIS fighters in adjacent buildings had begun zeroing in more accurately. The smoke was thinning, and the suppressing effect of surprise was gone. The rescue team knew they had only seconds left. Ephraim and the others lifted the survivors up onto the back of the tank. There was no time to wait for any vehicles now. And then, completely exposed, they began retreating on foot as the tank reversed at full speed, shielding them from the brunt of the incoming fire. Bullets cracked into the tank's hull. One round narrowly missed Ephraim's leg, tearing through the sand just inches from his boot. When they finally made it back behind the protective wall where the operation had begun, everyone collapsed, physically, emotionally, spiritually drained. But they had done it. The little girl survived. So did the 2 wounded men. All 3 were taken to field hospitals and received life-saving care. Today I have something very special to share with you. One of my former teammates from back when I was a Navy SEAL has one of the most insane stories you will ever hear, and recently, he gave me permission to share it. In June of 2011, I had just failed a very stressful and anxiety-inducing underwater test during Navy SEAL training. After I failed, my instructor told me to get out of the pool and go over to the corner with the other failures. So I climbed out and sulked my way to where my classmates were sitting, backs to the pool, in neat rows. I was totally gassed from the test, so when I sat down, I started dramatically breathing loudly to show just how hard I'd worked. About 2 seconds into my ridiculous performance, one of the guys sitting there, a big 18-year-old kid from Wisconsin named Ephraim Mattos, turned around and made eye contact with me. Through gritted teeth, he said, "Shut up. Everybody here is in pain." Then he turned back around. At first, I was mad. He'd totally called me out. But then it dawned on me. He was right. We were trying out to become Navy SEALs. They weren't looking for people who wanted sympathy. That moment stuck with me. And not just with me. Everyone who ever served with Ephraim remembers him. Especially because of what happened 5 years later. In 2012, about a year after our interaction on the pool deck, Ephraim and I graduated and became SEALs. I was sent to an East Coast team, and he was sent to a West Coast one. For the next 5 years, I didn't see him. Until one day, in 2017, I saw him on TV. It was mid-June. I was on base in Virginia with a bunch of other SEALs. We were wrapping up for the day when I noticed my phone lighting up with text messages from former teammates. All of them said the same thing. Turn on the news. There was always a muted news channel playing on a TV in our office. I turned to look and saw the words breaking news and Middle East. Assuming it was something major related to our jobs, I turned up the volume. The anchors were talking about a group of American civilians who had gone to Iraq and taken up arms against ISIS. Then they put an image on the screen of a bearded guy in his mid-20s, holding an AK-47 behind a tank. I recognized him immediately. It was Ephraim Mattos. Back in his first deployment to Afghanistan, Ephraim was doing rear security for his patrol as. Ephraim started screaming at them to stop. Go back. Don't come any closer, or I'll shoot. But they didn't stop. They were crying. Obviously innocent. Forced into this by the Taliban. He raised his weapon, flipped the safety off, aimed at one of the girls, and began applying pressure to the trigger. But just before he fired, the girls stopped, turned around, and ran back. They walked through a large open field after visiting a village. At one point, he looked back and saw 2 little girls, no older than 5 or 7, running toward them. Earlier that day, his unit had found a child's backpack rigged with explosives. And now these 2 girls were wearing similar backpacks. He didn't have to shoot. But the experience haunted him. More than any gunfight, it was that moment that changed him. How could anyone use children as weapons? When he returned home, Ephraim couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. So he began researching conflict zones around the world, and he kept coming back to Iraq, where ISIS was committing horrific atrocities. In early 2017, his Navy contract ended. He chose not to re-enlist. Instead, he reached out to a volunteer group in Iraq providing humanitarian aid. They said yes. Ephraim sold his house, packed a bag, grabbed his passport, and flew alone to northern Iraq. When he arrived in March 2017, he was met at the airport by a muscular, tattooed American in his 30s named Sky, a former Marine who had also deployed to Iraq. Sky took him to their group's safe house, where Ephraim met the team leader, Dave, a grizzled, mid-50s former Army Special Forces guy who'd spent decades working in conflict zones. Soon after, Ephraim, Dave, Sky, and others loaded into a convoy of armored ambulances and headed toward Mosul, a city ISIS had captured years earlier. They had to pass through countless checkpoints, always at risk of hitting an ISIS position and being gunned down. But they made it. At first, their mission was humanitarian. Ephraim helped distribute food and medical care. But after a month, everything changed. The Iraqi military launched a major operation to retake Mosul. The unit Ephraim was embedded with was assigned to help clear ISIS from surrounding villages. Suddenly, Ephraim, as a civilian, was in combat. In one mission, he ran across an active minefield. He entered homes looking for fighters. In one house, he and Dave found a tunnel leading underground. They entered without night vision or backup, throwing grenades as they moved. They reached a dead-end cavern. Just before turning back, they looked up and saw another tunnel entrance, high up. ISIS had likely escaped through it and removed the ladder. They told the Iraqi army, who sealed the tunnel entrance with a bulldozer. That night, they heard muffled explosions. The ISIS fighters, buried alive, had blown themselves up. Over the next month, Ephraim and the Iraqi unit were in constant skirmishes, but most of their work was medical. Then, in early May, they were ordered into the city of Mosul itself, into the heart of the fighting. On May 4th, Ephraim and the others rolled into the city in a massive convoy. ISIS opened fire with everything they had: mortars, rockets, machine guns. As they advanced, booby-trapped cars exploded around them. Civilians, trying to escape, were being gunned down by ISIS, used as human shields. Ephraim and the others jumped out, trying to draw fire away from the civilians. For 3 days, they exposed themselves constantly, providing medical care to wounded men, women, children, and Iraqi soldiers. The carnage was unimaginable. Ephraim called it the worst he had ever seen. So much death that his brain couldn't process it. They set up an aid station in a bombed-out building in southern Mosul. One day, on June 1st, they saw a huge spike in wounded civilians. Many couldn't even say what had happened. Some whispered of a massacre. The next morning, Ephraim and the others moved 1 block north to investigate. From behind a concrete wall, Ephraim peeked toward an intersection and saw dozens of bodies, men, women, children, slaughtered in the street. Over 200 civilians had been killed trying to flee past a hospital where ISIS was entrenched. Another 100 had been wounded. Among the bodies, Ephraim saw movement. A little girl was hiding beneath her mother's corpse. 2 wounded men lay near her. He yelled for them to run, but they were frozen. Shell-shocked, they organized a rescue. A tank would drive toward the hospital. Behind it, a Humvee would carry Ephraim and the others. They'd stop at the bodies, grab the survivors, and back out. But moments before launch, the Humvee driver backed out. Ephraim and the others approached the tank driver. He was still in. So, on foot, they got behind the tank. American artillery fired smoke grenades to obscure the area. As the tank rolled forward, ISIS opened fire blindly. Mortars landed. Bullets whizzed. The smoke was thinning. Ephraim was so scared he started dry heaving. But they made it to the bodies. Ephraim provided cover fire while Dave and another volunteer ran out. They grabbed the girl and 1 man. The other man was too injured to walk. They laid him on sheet metal and dragged him. But he slipped and landed in the tank's path. With no way to signal the driver, Ephraim dove and rolled the man out just in time. But now they were outside cover. Rockets and gunfire rained down. Ephraim realized he couldn't move the man quickly enough. He held his hand, said, "I'm sorry," and left him. Seconds later, the man was killed. As Ephraim got back behind the tank, he was shot through the leg. He collapsed in the path of the tank, but adrenaline surged and he limped to safety. Back at the intersection, they needed to cross a short stretch of open road, fully exposed, to return to the Iraqi lines. They yelled for help. No response. So Ephraim, in pain, just ran. He made it. He told the Iraqi army to send a Humvee. They did. Everyone else, the girl, the surviving man, the volunteers, were rescued. Ephraim collapsed behind a wall, getting bandaged. The girl was brought to the same aid station. She was in shock, but alive. She drank water, ate food, and stared blankly ahead. Her name was Demoa. She was 4 years old. She survived. As the tank rolled forward, ISIS opened fire blindly. Mortars landed. Bullets whizzed. The smoke was thinning. Ephraim was so scared he started dry heaving. But they made it to the bodies. Ephraim provided cover fire while Dave and another volunteer ran out. They grabbed the girl and 1 man. The other man was too injured to walk. They laid him on sheet metal and dragged him. But he slipped and landed in the tank's path. With no way to signal the driver, Ephraim dove and rolled the man out just in time. But now they were outside cover. Rockets and gunfire rained down. Ephraim realized he couldn't move the man quickly enough. He held his hand, said, "I'm sorry," and left him. Seconds later, the man was killed. As Ephraim got back behind the tank, he was shot through the leg. He collapsed in the path of the tank, but adrenaline surged and he limped to safety. Back at the intersection, they needed to cross a short stretch of open road, fully exposed, to return to the Iraqi lines. They yelled for help. No response. So Ephraim, in pain, just ran. He made it. He told the Iraqi army to send a Humvee. They did. Everyone else, the girl, the surviving man, the volunteers, were rescued. Ephraim collapsed behind a wall, getting bandaged. The girl was brought to the same aid station. She was in shock, but alive. She drank water, ate food, and stared blankly ahead. Her name was Demoa. She was 4 years old. She survived. Ephraim never spoke to her. She was too traumatized. But he later learned she was reunited with her family, and today is alive and well. After the rescue, Ephraim was flown back to the U.S. and discovered the entire mission had been filmed. A war crimes documentarian had caught the whole thing. The footage went viral. That's the video I saw in 2017, the one that made my phone light up. The gunshot wound didn't hit an artery or break a bone. Within months, Ephraim was back to full strength. And instead of resting, he returned to another war zone, Burma, this time with his own organization, Stronghold Rescue and Relief. Their mission is to help civilians in conflict zones. Their motto: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. They're a small group doing incredible work, but they need help. If you want to support real heroes doing real work, consider donating monthly. They'll even send you a shirt with that motto on the back.